Okay. There we go.
So basically what your foundation was founded on, which is the deprioritizing of family, has caused this epidemic of mental illness. It's not social media that's caused it. I mean, social media is a stressor in society, but there are many stressors in society. It's certainly a very harsh stressor for kids, but it's not, it didn't cause this this breakdown of children. And if you doubt that, you look at families that are very intact, where parents have been very present, and for the most part, those kids are not breaking down. Not all kids are breaking down, but the kids, what I was seeing in my practice is the kids who were breaking down at a very young age were the ones whose parents had deprioritized parenting, who had prioritized work outside the home, and seen parenting as sort of a hobby. If we, Freud said you need love and work to raise mentally healthy children and be happy, right? So, but he always said love first. So he meant you have to have love first, and then you can have meaningful work. I think we've turned it around in society to say we need meaningful outside the home, and then when we have a little free time, we can just play with our children. And I don't think that that's working for children because children have irreducible emotional and biological needs that we've tried to make fit into our own adult needs rather than the other way around. Economics is important. If you have people that are in extreme poverty, we know that there's a certain amount of money that you need just to have a roof over your head and food, and to feel to feel safe and secure financially. So it's not really opposing that idea, but I think for the most part, every family should have the right, the privilege. You'd say it should be a privilege and a right to raise healthy children. And to do that, you have to be as present as possible in that first critical period of brain development, which is 0 to 3. So you'd say in that period, pretty much all the child's personality and mental health for the future is laid down. And I think we skip over that part because it's an inconvenient truth.
Yeah, I think you're right, because we've over in the UK, there's quite a lot of focus on this early childhood at the moment. We've got the Duchess of Cambridge; she's been looking at that, but like you said, nobody seems to be raising the fact that actually pushing children out into subsidized childcare, institutional childcare, is not going to solve any of these problems. And we've got our current Conservative government. They've just released their new policy that they want to give families childcare vouchers that will be they can use from babies being 9 months old. So there's this big push to get all mothers back out to work. Like, that's a really positive thing, and they seem to think that it's flexible childcare and that children can go into nursery and that both parents can go out to work, that they think that's somehow going to solve the problem. So we've been very much saying, like how you've been saying, that actually children need their parents to be present, and also it seems to be very unpolitically correct for you to actually mention the fact that children also need their mothers. So I just wondered what your thoughts are about that and what you've seen in your practice.
Well, also I've tried to speak to the Royal Foundation, and they have been a little bit evasive. We're still trying to speak to the head of the Royal Foundation because she has a tremendous ability to be an advocate for this, but she's, the royal family avoids controversy. And so how controversial it is to say, it's fine to say 0 to 3 matters. There's a whole foundation, started by the Bezos, is, the 0 to 3 Foundation. It's fine to say the 0 to 3 Foundation. I mean, I can go around and say 0 to 3 matters, 0 to 3 matters. It doesn't mean anything if you don't tell people what that means, more specifically. It's not just you come home and you play with your children. That's not what 0 to 3 means. So mothering is different than fathering. It's not the same. They're both important. Both mothers and fathers play extremely important roles in children's development, both emotionally and neurologically, but they're not the same. And that has to do with the evolutionary response to, or the evolutionary nurturing response to our hormones, meaning that we produce different hormones. You know, we're not exactly the same biologically in terms of our nurturing behaviors, and our nurturing behaviors respond to hormones. So women produce more of something called oxytocin, which is a neurotransmitter. We call it the love hormone euphemistically, but basically it's the hormone that's produced when mothers are pregnant, when they breastfeed, and when they nurture, and it helps them to attach to their babies. And it also helps them, tends to influence their behavior to be more sensitive, empathic nurturers, meaning they tune into the distress of babies more intensely. Whereas fathers produce more of a hormone called vasopressin, which is a protective, aggressive hormone. So in other words, evading and avoiding and fighting predators. In the old days, that's what it was used for. Physically protecting your children. And so, you know, it tends to make fathers more sort of protective and aggressive, not sensitive and empathic. And so now we're switching it up, right? So society's saying, well, fathers can stay home, you know? And so, you know, the research shows that when fathers stay home with their babies, and their oxytocin levels do go up. And, you know, by the way, oxytocin, it's interesting, their testosterone levels go down because there's an inverse relationship between oxytocin and testosterone. So, you know, how that's going to affect the family too. But yeah, their sex drive goes down because when we're invested in nurturing, our nurturing behaviors lower our interest in mating behaviors. It's just, we're mammals. We're just mammals like any other mammals. But when fathers stay home, their oxytocin levels go up, but it doesn't make them more sensitive and empathic. It makes them more sort of playful, tactily stimulating of babies. So they throw the babies up in the air, they tickle them. Basically, fathers are wonderful with encouraging children to play, to explore, to separate. So their role is twofold. One is that mothers help to regulate emotions, like by soothing babies in distress and regulating their emotions. They regulate sadness, fear, distress, and fathers tend to regulate aggression. That's the emotion that they help children, particularly little boys, to regulate. So they regulate different emotions than mothers. And they also encourage separation, which at some point is really important for children, right? So they need attachment, but they also need to separate from their mothers. And so fathers sort of seduce children away from their mothers to be more exploratory and take more risks, a little bit more risk taking. So these are behaviors that are influenced by our hormones. These aren't, I mean, this isn't, you know, it's that whole debate of, is this just societally based? Is this just something we learn in society? No. Every mammal shows these behaviors, and every mammal responds to their hormones in the same way that we do. We're just mammals. And so, yeah, fathers and mothers are not the same. And in the first 3 years, you know, children need a sensitive, empathic nurturer who responds to distress. And, you know, fathers tend not to do that. They tend to sort of push children to distraction and push them to be resilient before they're able to be resilient. So resilience is based on a solid foundation of emotional and attachment security. Mm-hmm. So they're different. They're not the same. Mothers are in a unique biological way important to children. The issue now is that we have so many mothers with attachment disorders themselves, from 3 or 4 generations of the family breaking up, and the idea that women were pushed to sort of look away from their hormones, to turn away from their hormonal instinctual drive towards children. They were pushed to go out into the world. And so what that did is, over time, generationally, you know, I'm going to use a harsh word, but if you neglect your children, they develop coping mechanisms to help them to cope with the loss, which is what an attachment disorder is. And that attachment disorder is passed on to the next generation rather than the instinctual nurturing behavior. And so we have 3 now going on 4 generations of women who don't believe that mothering is important work, young men who don't believe that mothering is important work, and so therefore push their women to go out into the world and, work and make money and have more materialism. And, it's all sort of part of a very negative cycle. And, women that from a very young age are trained to believe that their children will be just fine and you can have it all at the same time. So what I say to women is you can have it all in life, but you just can't have it all at the same time. So that education you're getting is important. Having a career in the early days of your life is important. So you have something to go back to. If you don't and you have children right away, you can enter the workforce later, but the idea that we have to sort of be on a linear path like men, driven towards career goals, and that we can't get off that path and that children are secondary is really doing a lot of harm to children.
Yeah, it's really quite frightening, when you think of this big push towards just children being in institutionalized childcare from not even being a year old. So obviously this is what's happening in this country. What have you seen any other countries that do it better? Are there better solutions for this? And we've been looking at what they're doing in Hungary, which seems to be
Hungary is the only, used to be Finland, but Finland now has gone the way of Sweden, and Sweden is one of the highest mental illness statistics of any Northern European country because of how they raise their children. So this gender neutrality, gender equality thing just is not working. And also the fact that they as a society intimidate women into using daycare at 14 months. So 14 months is right in the middle of separation anxiety. So now you've taken a child that's been with their mothers, and now they're forcing fathers to stay home, even if fathers don't want to. So they won't even give the mothers the full 14 months. They'll only give them half. And then they force women back into the workforce. It's a real sort of fascistic government. I mean, and people don't understand, it's not socialist like UK. It's fascistic. It really is, because it forces women back into the workforce at 7 months, because it says we will not give you the full 14 months. Your fathers must stay home. And even if the fathers don't want to stay home, even if the fathers aren't interested, even if the fathers would make terrible primary attachment figures, they force the fathers to stay home, use or lose, basically. And then these children go from 7 months full-time with their mothers to then being forced to be 7 months full-time with their fathers, even though they don't have that go-to distress response with their fathers. And then they're put into 10 hours of daycare, where they the statistics are the likes of 12 to 1, because there's usually somebody sick. And so it's like 12 to 1 child at 14 months when your children are going through separation anxiety. I mean, it's a total sort of disregard of child development. It's so bizarre to me, because it's the economic, it's agendas, it's adult agendas. It's sort of like, what's the agenda in Sweden? It's I suppose it's gender equality. We're all the same is the agenda, and the agenda is economic,
Yeah.
So yeah, Hungary used to be Finland allowed. Actually, Finland still does allow. Finland still allows stipends to families. It's not, it's not enough to feed a family of 4, but they give them, I think, $14,000 a year, something like that, the equivalent. And they let them use it the way they want, so at least it supplements the family income.
Yeah. It would be better for them to actually have that choice if the mums do want to stay at home,
right?
Which is what our government seems to be completely short-sighted. You mentioned that it just seems to be economics driven in getting as many adults out into the workforce as possible to pay tax, presumably. But what I don't understand is this short-sightedness, because if it's about economics, then actually not putting children's needs first and their development first, then surely the government can see that we have this ever-increasing mental health decline in children and young people, and they just don't seem to be joining the dots to see that actually early childhood development has this impact on adolescence later in life. So what can be done? I mean, are we just going to have to keep raising the alarm to actually keep pointing out to the governments that this is the consequences of their policies?
Well, they don't connect the dots. So I go to the UK at least once a year, sometimes twice a year, and I speak to a group of very interested and knowledgeable members of the House of Commons and some of the House of Lords, but it's always the same group. I mean, they fight for this, and there's rarely Labour Party, and the Labour Party is about to get in. So the Labour Party is always the Conservative Party, and there's one Labour Party person that comes to when I come to speak, but the Labour Party really pushes for daycare, sort of like the far left in America pushes for daycare, because it's the economic agenda. It's the agenda of, we get as many people into the workforce without really thought of the long-term consequences of doing so. And I don't think it's very thoughtful or sort of thoughtful about the future consequences. So you're saying, it's true, because if you have children breaking down, you essentially have adults breaking down, because children become adults. And so then you have an unstable society, but they don't think long term. It's sort of like fossil fuels in this country. We need fossil fuels because how are we going to drive our cars? They don't think long term of consequence. There's no long term consequences thinking. So, you have to connect the dots for them. And I hate to say I go and preach to the converted in the UK, but at least there's, I don't know, 20 or 30 people in the House of Commons and the House of Lords that understand the connection now. And they hold the line. The problem is they're about to lose, and it's about to be the Labour Party, and they're going to push to get as many women into the workforce. That's the problem. That's what's happening in the UK. I was speaking to, it'll turn around again in the UK. Yeah. It'll be the Conservative Party again, but for the time being, just like in our country, we're about to have Donald Trump again, which makes me want to shoot myself. You can record that, and I can say that on tape. It makes me want to shoot myself, the idea that we're going to have Donald Trump as president. But there we go. I mean, it cycles around. And
I mean, I suppose if the Labour Party do get in at the next election, hopefully it might actually shock the Conservative Party to become actually conservative with a small t again, because that is certainly not been happening recently with the push they've got for basically putting babies into childcare, and the big push into inappropriate relationship and sex education in school, which they've brought in, and sort of somehow trying to unpick that at the moment. So yeah, it's maybe these things come to try us, and then actually they turn things around again. So actually having some common sense, but we can but hope. So the other thing I wanted to ask you, so we've talked about obviously the issues and what government should do about it, but in the meantime, what can parents do? What can parents do to try and protect their families against this? If finances are a problem, which a lot of people are struggling at the moment with cost of living crisis in this country, what can they do to try and mitigate the problem that if they're at work? Are there any solutions that you can suggest?
Well, I mean, one thing I can suggest is work less. If you have to work less. Work part-time, or find work that you can do at least partially from home. COVID gave us those opportunities. It's not ideal to be home and distracted, but it's better to be home. So when your child is in distress, at least you're available to them. It's not ideal. We always talk about the ideal. The ideal is that you love mothering, you're interested in children, you're interested in your children more than anything else. And it gives you great joy and pleasure to watch your children grow and to nurture them and to educate them. And that's the ideal, right? And that you're as present as possible. The less than ideal is some people have to work financially, they can't cut it. And it's, so I would say in those situations, work less. Try to work less, be as present as more. The more physically and emotionally present you are for your children, the better off they'll be. It may not be ideal, but you do your best. And then, you know, in terms of order of appearance and what's best for children, the best is to have their primary attachment figure, which is usually their mother. The next best would be to have a kinship bond there to nurture the children. That means a father, a grandparent, an aunt or uncle, or an extended family member that is going to have a more similar investment in that child, because they're going to be in that child's life forever. That would be the next best thing. And pay them. Pay a kinship bond. Pay your mother to stay. You know, if your mother says, well, I have to go to work to pay my rent, pay your mother, you know, to stay home at least the part-time that you're working. You know, the next best thing would be to have a single surrogate caregiver. That means a babysitter or a nanny there when you're not there, and someone who's going to be with your child for years and years and years. Consistent, non-transient, loving, sensitive, empathic, nurturing care, an alternative attachment figure when you're not there. That would be the next best thing to kinship bonds. If you can't afford that, then the next best thing is to share that nanny with another family. Grab your best friend, Jane, and say, Jane, let's not put our children into daycare. Let's share the cost of this nanny. It'll be the same cost as if we put our children into daycare. You know, daycare is not cheap, you know, so let's pay this nanny, and we will share the care. And the number of the ratio of nanny to child will still be better than daycare. So let's say you have 2 children and that other family has 2 children. Now you have 1 person to 4 children. That's still going to be better than daycare, because daycare isn't less than 1 to 5, usually 1 to 8, and in many cases 1 to 12, because of the number of daycare workers who are always absent, because it's a terrible job. It's a terrible job to nurture other people's children and try to soothe 5 to 10 children who are in distress at the same time.
Yeah.
And those women, because it's usually women, those women break down.
Yeah.
They break down, they get discouraged, they get depressed, they get overwhelmed. And I say to you and any other women that are listening to this, imagine caring for 5 to 8 children who are under the age of 3, who are not your children, and imagine soothing them from moment to moment. You would get very depressed indeed, and get sick quite a bit. Yeah. A lot of absenteeism, and then it ends up being, for these children, tremendous stress being in a group environment, and then this transient kind of group of people that are caring for them. It's completely empathically impaired to put children in that environment. It's when adults literally have a schizoid response and shut down their empathy. They literally, like a light switch in your kitchen, they flip it off and they say, my children are fine, and they're not fine.
Gosh, it really is so frightening to think about the consequences of this, and the sort of the short-termism of in terms of the policies of governments just pushing this. So do you think that we need to fundamentally change how we teach children in schools about having babies and mothering? Certainly we've been looking a lot into what's going on in relationships and sex education over here, and some of the things we've been seeing are just awful in terms of teaching about explicit sex to children under the age of legal consent, and gender ideology, which is a whole other story. But they don't ever seem to mention having the family and these kind of things that we've been discussing. They don't tend to talk about how girls might actually have a real just a vocation in terms of being a mother. That's not mentioned in the sex education curriculum here. They don't mention the fact that it's much easier and healthier really for mothers to have their babies before the age of 30. You know, it's sort of they sort of seem to be talking about egg freezing, and that's certainly something that's been happening in Scotland, and egg donation, and that seems to be on the curriculum more than the actual fact of that actually girls might want to, when they're old enough to become mothers, that they might want to actually stay at home and look after their own children. It just doesn't seem to get a mention in the curriculum. So do you think we need a big overhaul of how we're teaching children about families and how they have babies?
I mean, I think the idea, it doesn't matter the order of things. So this is the way I think about it. If women decide you know, sometimes it gives women confidence to have careers early on, I think, particularly young women today. I think that ship has sailed. The idea that why are we educating young women? Why are we giving them college education? Why are we giving them graduate education if they don't have a foundation of something that will give them a career and work outside the home at some point in their lives? I think what we don't teach young women is that you can do everything in life. You just can't do it all at once well. And so, you know, raising children probably will be one of the most meaningful things you'll do in your life, because in the end, when you're lying on your deathbed in 100 years, it's not going to be your meaningful work outside the home, your colleagues that are sitting by your bed. It's going to be your family. And that's Aristotle's deathbed question. Who's going to be sitting by your side, loving you and sending you off into, you know, off of this planet if it isn't the people that you love? So we haven't emphasized love, and we haven't talked to young women about the importance of when you know, as Penelope Leach said many years ago, many years before me, she said, if, you know, anybody can have a child, but if you don't want to nurture your child, don't have children. And I know the pro-natality movement wants everybody to have children, but, you know, the reality is not everybody should have children. And there's many young people today who have very intense attachment disorders. And to be perfectly frank, they probably shouldn't have children, at least without having some treatment first.
Yeah.
And so what we want to educate young women about is about how raising children is meaningful work, how it's joyful, how being with children is a wonderful thing, and that they can do both in life, but they shouldn't get stuck on this idea of having linear careers. I go to college, I go to graduate school, I become this, I become a doctor, I become a lawyer, I, you know, go on to, you know, and I can't get off that track, right?
Yeah.
So what we need to teach them is the flexibility to get off a work track at any point in their lives, to do something that may be more meaningful, and know that they can always go back to it. And that having children transforms you and changes you, and that it, you know, it makes you see things in different colors. And therefore you may not even want to go back to the same career. You may want to go back to a different career, you know. So sort of, I think the idea is the rigidity of ego. It's sort of, we've created these very rigid little soldiers, and we have done it to them. Yeah. We've done it to boys and girls. We've made them rigid in terms of, you know, being educated and then getting a career and being successful and economically and materially. And this is what it means. And we made these little soldiers, and they're not flexible. There's no flexibility. There's no ability to see that life is not a rigid linear thing, you know, and it might not be children. It might be that your parent gets sick and you have to take time off of work to care for your parent. You know, it may be that you get sick. It may be. And so we haven't created resilience, because resilience is flexibility. And we haven't said to young people at a young age that mothering and fathering is meaningful work. And that we, you know, we don't want to treat life in a linear fashion. We want to have meaningful work in our life. We want to have meaningful careers, but we don't want those careers to control us.
Yeah, definitely. I agree. We certainly need to change the way that we are teaching children about how they're going to live their life. Like you said, it does seem to be this big push into making money and achieving, and for boys and for girls, and there isn't this focus on the family, and that the meaning in your life isn't going to come primarily just from your job. You need to have that foundation with your family. So we certainly need to be rethinking how we're teaching children in this country.
I mean, you could say that focus on work alone is also disrupting marriages. You know,
Yeah.
Relationships require connection, and they require time. And, you know, so if you're so fixed on just, you know, work outside the home, then it doesn't, all relationships suffer. But, you know, yeah, definitely the relationships with your children suffer. So, you know, we aren't educating people young enough. We really aren't. You know, and then there's the issue of what happens to children who are neglected when they're very young. is that there's a whole generation of young people who don't want children. And some of it's climate change, and everybody talks about that, but that's not the main reason they don't want children. You know, they say that, but the reason they don't want children is that they can't fully develop into adulthood because it's a kind of regression. They want to stay children forever. They want to stay in a narcissistic bubble forever, which is narcissism, or being self-centered, is part of being a child, meaning you are meant to be your parents' entire, meaning your parents are your universe and you're theirs. And so that's what it's meant to be. But because, in fact, it's a developmental phase, you're meant to pass through it, particularly in adolescence, where you're very self-centered, almost cocooning, developing so you can become a butterfly, so to speak. You're meant to go through it and then come out the other side and leave that narcissism behind. Our kids are not leaving it behind. They're getting stuck. They're getting stuck developmentally. It's like developmental stunting. They do not, it's like Peter Pan. They do not want to grow up. I don't know whether it was Jordan Peterson or someone said that you don't become an adult until you have a child.
Yeah.
And they don't want to be adults. There's a rabbi who is wonderful. If I can find it, I'll send it to you, because it's the rabbi, and he put out this, you know, I hate social media, but my husband sent it to me because he said, you know, because he knows this is what I do. He sent me this little kind of clip of this rabbi. It's a very famous kind of Orthodox rabbi saying essentially that children don't want to be adults today because they don't see their parents wanting to be adults. In a way, when we don't want to parent, we have children, but we don't want to care for them, we're not being our best adult selves. So they don't see their parents being adults. They don't see good role models. And they go, well, why would I want to do that? Yeah, no,
that's a really good note to end on, because we've only got a couple of minutes left. So no, that was great. Thank you. I will I'll stop the recording now. I should be able to use that.